some people say, gotta take my fish oil, but not necessarily sure why they're taking fish oil. So I want you to really understand that today, why we talk about fish oil and the benefits. So another way to calm inflammation is eating the right types of fats, particularly the omega-3 fats. Now, in general, most of us do not have a shortage of fats in our diet. So it's not like we have to go out and try to eat a lot more. It's the balance that's important. So think of omega-6 as a very inflammatory fat, and omega-3s is anti-inflammatory. And they're like a teeter-totter because balance is the key because of the enzymes used in both pathways. So ideally, the ratio of fatty acids should be a 1-to-1 ratio intake of the omega-6s to omega-3s. So what are the ranges? Well, we think if that ratio number is 6-to-3 of greater than 15, it's a very high risk of chronic inflammatory diseases. So we think about that number is very important. If the ratio is greater than 15, we've got a problem. Well, here's the bigger problem. The typical Western diet has a ratio closer to 16-to-1. Children's diets, what they typically eat, that ratio is as high as 40-to-1. We need to keep it closer to 4-to-1. And we know that higher than 15 puts you at incredibly high risk of disease. So these kids have a 40-to-1 ratio most of the time with what they're eating. It's, I guess it's not necessarily a surprise that they say this will be the first generation where parents outlive their children. And that's a dreadful thought. But when we see where those inflammatory reactions are coming into play with what the kids are eating, it starts to make a little sense. When we think about these omegas, there's a specific example we can talk about. So there was a big jump in omega-6s. Soybean oil has a ratio of about 7.5-to-1. So not over the 15, but definitely putting in the moderate risk. Between years 1909 and 1999, the US consumption of soybean oil increased 1,000-fold. That led to huge spikes in the percent of our daily calories, and specifically what comes from omega-6 fats. So if you look at this graph, ideal is 4-to-3, or less. So we want that number to be 4 or 3 or less. Corn, 83. So we think of corn oil. Soybean oil, we talked about as 7.5. Chicken fat, 15.5. And the ratio of omega-6s to 3s. Check out fish oil, right? We always talk about fish oil. 0.3. It is an incredible source of omega-3s, and it can be a wonderful balancer to that teeter-totter. So it's great if we cut back on our omega-6s. Most of us need to increase our omega-3s so that balance is there. So what you want to do, you want to focus on cutting out your high omega-6 foods. Typically, those are going to be your foods that are processed, that are quick, that are going to be the cheaper oils that are used. And you're going to focus also on getting more omega-3s in to balance that teeter-totter out. Well, what are some of our greatest omega-3 foods? Flaxseed, it's back, right? So flaxseed was an amazing antioxidant. It's also loaded with omega-3s. Wild fish, particularly salmon. Gosh, we love wild salmon when we think about omega-3 boosting. Walnuts, chia seeds, spinach, and there's kale. Kale used to be the most commonly used purpose for kale was the decoration on buffets. Like think of Wendy's, back in the 80s, all that kale, now we eat it, right? So healthy balance of omega-3s and all of those foods, it's gonna really help keep your body strong and calm those inflammatory responses. So let's see, we've talked about some food choices. We've talked about controlling blood sugar. We've talked about how antioxidants